There were few films that were as cuttingly topical as Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb when it was released in February of 1964. Loosely adapted from Peter George's 1959 novel Red Alert, Dr. Strangelove follows what would happen if a rogue military officer ordered a preemptive nuclear strike on the Soviet Union. Strangelove was originally going to follow its source material relatively closely, until Kubrick realized that the whole situation was an utter farce, and shifted course to make it into the satiric dark comedy we have today. As with all forms of art, Dr. Strangelove is very much a product of its time, and as such, it is important to place it within its historical context. According to the essay The Darkest Room by David Bromwich, Dr. Strangelove registers the terrifying impact of the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear destruction. Indeed, current events of the day affected what the film would become throughout production and even up to its release. The first test screening was slated for November 22, 1963, the day of John F. Kennedy's assassination. Not surprisingly, they rescheduled the screening in order to change a few lines and scenes that, unfortunately, had parallels to the event and the young president. While the film seldom references actual real-world events, it is the more abstract ideas it references that truly couches it in its Cold War context. In the years between the releases of Red Alert and Dr. Strangelove, intercontinental ballistic missiles became a legitimate threat. As such, the concept of a missile gap entered the public consciousness, as did the idea of mutually assured destruction. Unique amongst films of its kind, Dr. Strangelove uses its key characters as emblems and mouthpieces for the ideas and policies it lampoons. The titular Dr. Strangelove and General Buck Turgidson are emblematic of the concepts of MAD and the missile gap, respectively. President Merkin Muffley, himself based on U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson, represents the real-world plans put together by the Eisenhower administration for situations like those portrayed in the film. Finally, Brigadier General Jack D. Ripper is famously emblematic of general Cold War paranoia, but taken up to 11. While there is plenty I could say about the latter two characters, they each deserve their own videos. As such, I will primarily focus on Turgidson and Strangelove. It is incredibly fitting that the titular doctor is the face of the concept of mutually assured destruction in the film. Much like Peter Sellers' other role, President Merkin Muffley, Dr. Strangelove, formerly Dr. Merkwürdigliebe in his native Deutschland, is an amalgamation of German rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, father of the hydrogen bomb Edward Teller, mathematician John von Neumann, and Rand Corporation strategist Herman Kahn. The latter two are intimately connected to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. The following exchange between Peter Sellers and Peter Sellers sums up the philosophy quite well.
But how is it possible for this thing to be triggered automatically and at the same time impossible to untrigger?
Mr. President, it is not only possible, it is essential. That is the whole idea of this machine, you know. Deterrence is the art of producing in the mind of the enemy the fear to attack.
The work of Herman Kahn, namely his 1960 book On Thermonuclear War, was a huge influence on Kubrick while he wrote the script. The idea of the Doomsday Machine's potency being amped by the inclusion of the fictitious
Cobalt Thorium-G
comes from Kahn's description of cobalt-enhancing radioactive fallout when used in a nuclear device. Similarly, Kahn's seemingly cold and analytical tone, as well as his use of the term megadeaths as a measure for potential nuclear casualties, comes across in General Turgidson's seemingly casual attitude towards the whole situation, and the notion that a best-case scenario for a Soviet counterattack would be
no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops, depending on the breaks.
Speaking of Buck, the idea of the missile gap was much more prevalent in the minds of the average American citizen due to its prevalence in the 1960 presidential campaign. While it is uncertain as to whether or not JFK was aware of the discrepancy in the number of missiles, he nevertheless pushed the issue to make the Eisenhower administration and his opponent Vice President Nixon look weak on the issue of defense. As Kubrick and many others suspected, the so-called missile gap turned out to be false. Kubrick's own suspicion of its validity made the missile gap a perfect target for satire in the form of General Buck Turgidson. After Dr. Strangelove outlines his plans to preserve humanity in underground mine shafts after the Doomsday Machine has been activated, Turgidson begins spiraling into a flurry of concerns regarding the possibility that the Soviets could corner the mineshaft market, so to speak. His frenzy of paranoid concern hits its climax with the uproariously outlandish line,
Mr. President, we must not allow a mine shaft gap!
In addition to lampooning the idea of the missile gap, Kubrick also satirizes how proponents of the Mad Doctrine oppose the idea of a wide network of underground bunkers, on the grounds that having such measures communicates the notion that it removes the assured destruction element from mutually assured destruction, thus rendering the policy moot. One would think that a film satirizing the entire idea of the Cold War in the wake of the Kennedy assassination and the Cuban Missile Crisis would be ill-received upon release. Well, you'd be kind of right, but equally wrong. Critic Bosley Crowther of the New York Times wrote, "My reaction is quite divided, because there is so much about it that is so grand, so much that is brilliant and amusing, and so much that is grave and dangerous." Dr. Strangelove is arguably just as relevant today as it was 54 and a half years ago when it released. Rising tensions with the likes of North Korea, Russia, and the foreign policy mess that is the Middle East, as well as a president known for his talk first, ask questions later approach, have put the world on edge. Maybe if the leaders of the world take the messages of Dr. Strangelove to heart, we can all meet again some sunny day.